Hi friends, welcome back. Today my guest is Adam Younis. Adam is an amazing human being with such an interesting perspective on the essence of great products and the nature of effort.
There's almost like thresholds of where some aspects, if they're really high polish, will make the thing shine, and then other parts, on the negative side, if they're really obvious, it can destroy the perception of the thing. But if there's enough good stuff and the bad stuff is not offensive, then it doesn't matter how cohesive the whole is. It's almost like it's more memorable. It's enough for something to stand out in one area for us to appreciate it.
Since his childhood, Adam has always been fascinated with games, which led him to becoming a game developer. The game he's currently working on, called Insignia, is truly an amazing project, with such an extreme care and attention to details.
I've thought about this a lot. I think the big difference between those projects and this project is I really didn't hold back in placing kind of all of myself into it in terms of the vision for what it could be. I did a very bad job of defining like a limited scope. I basically said, like, this game is going to have all of my dreams in it, or whatever, all of my passion.
He shares his game dev journey and game dev tutorials on Twitch and YouTube. If you are not yet familiar with Adam and his work, please do check him out. I'm sure you will enjoy it. And now, let's get to our conversation. We can start just with you sharing a little bit about yourself, about like what you've been doing and stuff like this.
Okay, well, my name's Adam. I have a background in UX design, and for the last maybe 7 years or so, I have been following my passion for creating video games. I've always been really passionate about them, and there was kind of just like a point in my life where I had this, long-term hobby, creative interest, something that I enjoyed doing as a player, that I had sort of always wanted to do, but never felt confident that I was, could do it or had the opportunity to do it. And when enough positive forces aligned, I kind of took the leap. And since then, I've been working on a number of games, but particularly one that's called Insignia. And it is kind of like my dream game, or the game I would have, been most excited by as like a 10-year-old. So it's a project I've been working on in Unity for the last, 6 or 7 years full time. I have a YouTube channel where I chronicle kind of like my development and also share things that I learn. So tutorials on Unity and on pixel art, which is the game's art style. I'm building the game solo so far, so that includes all the programming, the design, animation, writing, even music up to this point. But I'm looking to sort of change that in the near future as I push towards a release. So wanting to build a bit more of a team, more of a marketing push, and get some funding and that kind of thing. Yeah.
And you said you were working on the game for 6 and 7 years?
Yes, I actually had the first concept for the game in 2014. So I was working at a design agency, and I had been, from high school through to university, through to the start of my job, been doing things in and around game design. So designing characters or animations, putting them online and learning programming. And so I had been playing with game concepts and engines and things like that. And in 2014, I kind of put those together into like an idea for a game. But I didn't really start working on it as a proper project. You could call this like pre-production until like 2016. And then maybe like the last six months of 2016, I was working kind of like full time. And then every time, like every minute that I wasn't working, I was working on the game. And then in 2017, I quit my job. So since 2017, since February 2017, I've been working full time on the game. There have been periods of time where I've had to do contract work back in UX design or motion design or animation to help fund what I'm doing. But at this stage, I'm mostly financially independent from having to do that. So through content creation, Patreon, things like that, I've kind of stabilized, and now I'm just focusing on the game.
That is amazing journey, because staying, like continuing working on something for that long it requires certain, I think, kind of, there should be something inside, right, that kind of doesn't let you to stop, even if you kind of at some point it becomes very difficult, and it is very nice. And because I'm sorry, I don't know, like, you don't understand correctly that the game has not yet been released.
That's right.
Okay, and but do you feel like at this stage you're somewhere in the neighborhood of, like, so it could be turned into an actual product that could be released?
Yeah, so I've always considered myself, like, prior to this 7-year period, if we rewind back to when I was like 24 and before that, I would have considered myself somebody who had a very difficult time finishing things. Most of my projects that I started, I would spend 6 weeks or so experimenting, playing around, and enjoying it. And then as soon as it became kind of like difficult, I would basically just say, okay, well, all the fun stuff about the conceptual aspects of how I would do this have been solved, and now all that's ahead of me is the doing it part, which I'm not interested in, so I would just move on. I think a lot of people do that. For me, I've thought about this a lot. I think the big difference between those projects and this project is I really didn't hold back in placing kind of all of myself into it in terms of the vision for what it could be. I did a very bad job of defining like a limited scope. I basically said, like, this game is going to have all of my dreams in it or whatever, all of my passion. And so because the game in its most like simple description, there's nothing in that I have, how do I put this? Whenever I find myself in a place where I'm kind of feeling a little bit burnt out on some aspect of the game, or just creatively maybe I'm feeling a little bit fatigued, the game is still kind of like, it's still so close to the core of like my passions as far as the story and the themes and the mechanics and the art style and all of those things, that I don't have anywhere else to go to, or the places that I go to are still within the project. So if I'm tired of doing animation, I can do some programming. Or if I'm feeling like I want to express myself, creatively through music, there's lots of music I can work on for the game. Or even branding and design. I can think about the logo and the motion design for how I would do the marketing for the game. So in trailers and things like that, I can go to all of these places that are different places, but are still within the project. And I guess I mentioned scope earlier. I want to be clear that what I've learned over time, and the reason why this is like a 6-year project and not a 2-year project, is, before you work on something, it's very hard to actually understand scope in a practical sense, in terms of how long something will take. And so when I look at the project, it's not that it doesn't have a scope, but it's that the scope that I assumed, that I just said, oh, well, definitely I will be managing all of these aspects, that just takes a lot longer than I thought it would. So, I guess at this stage, you asked, like, how far am I, or like, is the game close to being a shippable product? At this stage, I think that the game is, within 24 months of release, once I cross a very specific production threshold, which is the point where I'm comfortable bringing other people on and effectively like pitching the game to like funding. So whether that's Kickstarter or a publisher. And the reason why I haven't crossed that threshold is really just a matter of personal comfort. So I have a very specific vision for what I want the game to feel like. And until I've developed the game to a point where I think I have a clear example of how I want it to feel and a definition for how each of the pieces fit together, I don't feel like I can trust the process to prioritize that vision once there are more people involved. So for example, if a publisher comes on board and they say, we'll give you this much funding for hiring additional resources, but we really need the game to come out in 8 months from now or whatever, or 12 months or whatever it is. Imposing that deadline, if we come to some point in the development process where we need to iterate, but we don't have time to iterate, then we have to compromise and, probably prioritize the release. And I don't really want to make those kinds of vision-based compromises or compromises on the feel of the product when I don't have to. Like, until I'm, like, kind of, I've run out of patience, I can just keep refining the core of it. Mm-hmm. But once I have that refined core, I feel like it's much easier to direct other people to follow that vision if I've proven it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where it's at.
It feels like this project has become kind of a part of you. So it is
definitely.
It is, and it is very, and I know this feeling because it is you have put so much effort into it, like a lot of thinking about this, just like spending a lot of time doing this and building the vision in the like how you want to get it done, and you want to get it done, right? Because on some level it kind of feels like if at some point you just kind of give up and hack to the end, right? It kind of feels like you don't get the satisfaction of like building something great that
Yes.
you wanted to do, right?
And that was the start. That was the only reason I didn't take on the project thinking I just want to release something. It was, no, I really want to make something specific. And so I've been chasing that since then.
Are you kind of scared about releasing it? Like, what would happen when you actually release it? Like, have you thought a lot about it?
It's a good question. Yeah. So I because it's been so long, I have had the opportunity to, even though this is the first like full-scale game dev project that I've worked on, I have had the opportunity to take time off the project. The longest period of time was 6 months. I stopped for about 6 months to work on a smaller game so that I could experience what it would feel like to release something and to see how I would react. And just to be more familiar with that process. So in 2020, I worked on a small game that I released on Android. And that project, I felt it took a lot out of me emotionally to release it, definitely. I was very scared of how people would receive it. And I would say even there was a part of me that almost needed to emotionally separate myself from it because I felt the emotions were like too strong. And particularly because I committed to releasing it, supporting it for, a few weeks and then leaving it. And that process of having to say to myself, this is finished, like I'm done with it. It made it very difficult to actually cross that finish line and release it because I felt like it's like letting something die. It's like grieving for something a little bit. So if I can avoid that for this game, I think maybe that's why there's a part of me that's almost a bit stubborn, like a little bit, I would say people have asked me in the past if I'm a perfectionist. I think in my core, I'm not a perfectionist. I like to, follow my interest, and oftentimes my interest runs out before, like, I'm able to polish something right down to having no more creases in it. But I'm very considerate of expectations and the feedback that I get. As a UX designer, you have to be so conscious of user feedback. So when it comes to player feedback and player expectations, through the early period of the game's development, I would take prototypes to regular meetup groups, and I would have other developers or people just at like a bar play the game. And it became clear to me that, like almost immediately, that my standard of what I thought was intuitive or fun or simple, it doesn't carry very easily. You have to be so meticulous with video games to make something feel good or worth people's time or worth their money, or even just valuable enough to warrant that game being spoken about or promoted above all of the others, like just to be competitive in the market. The standard has to be very high, I think. So
do you mean,
that's kind of where that comes from.
Do you mean kind of people who you were talking with have a high expectations based on what they see in the industry and stuff like this, or this was kind of more coming from yourself in terms of standards?
I think there is a disconnect between even as developers. So everybody who plays games, we call them players, and then if you develop games, you be a developer. As players, our expectations when we pick up a controller, and it's the same when we use an app, our expectations are a lot higher than we think they are. In that people will say, oh, I understand that this is just a work in progress. I understand that it's, not finished yet. But it's very easy to pick up a controller and feel what's wrong, and say, oh, that's not quite the way, it doesn't feel very good. Or, if you have an app and you're scrolling through and it's stuttering, you can feel those aspects that take you out of the experience immediately. It's almost like subconscious. And so even developers who are very aware, like they work on their own work in progress games constantly, cannot separate themselves from that feeling or the like socially, people want to empathize and sympathize and be understanding. They want to say, oh, you've done a great job. And that can be true. You can do a good job and be making something very special. But that doesn't make it worthy of people's money as a product or their time. You know what I mean? That's kind of the disconnect.
Nobody cares about the grind of it, right? Like, I mean, people can say that, yeah, you're doing great, and but it kind of ends there, right? And the next step is like, okay, tell us when it is actually ready, right? But you're saying that even developers who actually experience that don't really understand that, because I would imagine that for example, I think that people who kind of went through this grind, right, through this process of working to have something released at the end, like a song or a movie or something like this, and there is like a movie, right, like 2 hours, like a year of work, at some point just release 2 hours. People see, is it like wow or not? And that's it. And then like kind of life moves on. I would imagine that people who actually do this kind of stuff, yes, they can. I mean, they also don't care that much, and then they want to see the final product, but they still kind of have a bit like a deeper connection with the person who is developer, right?
I think the explanation for this is the same distinction between someone who is experienced in a subject and somebody who can teach that subject, or the difference between somebody who can work in a film, if we're using that as an example, and someone who can direct a film. I think guidance or like teaching, it's a very different skill from doing. And so understanding the if you experience something like someone puts a game in front of me or some art they've created, which happens a lot on stream, someone will say, hey, can you review some art that I've done? The task of assessing something that's not necessarily professional work, it's maybe someone's first attempt at something, being able to prioritize, accept the bits that aren't polished or aren't very good, process all of that, and then say something that is most helpful, that allows them to move forward efficiently. That's a different task than just saying what's wrong with all of it. Do you know what I mean? There's like a guidance aspect that isn't one-to-one with just identifying flaws. But as a player, so, just if someone says, do you think this is fun? That is just about the raw experience and am I enjoying myself? Can I get immersed? So feedback is just, I think, and again, it's something that in UX you spend a lot of time. If you've done any like UX research with stakeholder stuff like that, it's very common, even in prototyping testing, where users will give some feedback, and it's the role of the UX designer to interpret that feedback into something meaningful for the direction. Because if you just take the feedback immediately or directly, how that translates is very often not. It's not easy to just take the feedback and apply it wholesale. There might be lots of other reasons why it needs to be different.
It is, a lot. I have experience when, you talk with people about something, I don't know, a design for the interior, for the room, right? And people can kind of say, and if they see something that they like, for example, a room that they like, they can say, yeah, that looks great. But yes. I have experienced that not much people can kind of explain what exactly makes the room look good.
That's
and
it.
what like doesn't work in this room, right? Or in the design, visual design and stuff like this.
I have a really good example that I just thought up. So like an example would be in interior design. If somebody walks into a room and you say, how does it feel? And they say, it feels very spacious. That's not a comment on how many things are in the room. The room can have lots of things in it and still feel spacious. And so if somebody says, this room doesn't feel spacious, if you just make more space by taking things out, that's not going to necessarily solve the problem, because it might be more about light. It might be that, we need to, have more light in the room, or if the ceiling was a little bit higher, it would feel more spacious. There are lots of other or even the temperature of the lights, or, the direction the lights are coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I also was thinking a lot about this, because I was thinking those examples about interior design, I was really, even like furniture, some furniture is like very heavy feeling. And some furniture is made in a way when there's a lot of light, a lot of empty...
negative space?
Like, negative space is another thing, is when you kind of have at least some space between items in the room, right? Because a lot of people, like for example, my own family, when I was living, we had like a room and we had like a sofa, next to a table. There was no room at all. And I didn't really understand what's wrong, but it felt like wrong. And only after I was studying different images, mostly on Pinterest, different images, how different rooms are built, I started to notice what exactly makes feel like. I was always using the word light, right? It feels like very the spacious, the thing that you were talking about, and then and from there you can see how, for example, you can have like a night table right to your right, and it could be like a block, or it could be a block, for example, without legs and just hang on the wall or something like this. And it's very interesting. And I was watching one of your videos where you were describing some animation of an attack, right? And you were going basically a frame by frame and explaining every visual effect, right? Because there are sometimes there are a lot of it, and when like a regular person plays, they do not notice. They do not have the time to process every single visual effect, right? It just happens, and it feels either like good or not. But the time that you spent going through each frame and explaining and thinking about it was amazing, and it felt very close to.
Yeah, yesterday we were doing visual effects as well, and I spent the last 2 days 6 hours per day working on one particle effect, and in chat constantly the last 4 hours people were saying it looked good 2 iterations ago, but it looks better now, and they kept saying I would have stopped here, and I kept going, and every time they kept saying, oh, that looks better. And it's the same kind of thing. Like, I guess probably the one like quality or characteristic that I think makes people who are creative or people who get into this kind of industry the way we are is that interest. It's like I'm trying to articulate why we like something, what makes something good. I think that goes a long way.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Because, and it even goes like even deeper. Like I have always thought about the most important thing that I kind of figured out in my life is just like being honest with yourself, right? And if you are trying to be honest with yourself, even like deep inside of you, and you are saying, okay, I want to be able to create great, I want to draw and I want to create great images, right? Then you are trying, but you kind of need to honestly look at what you have drawn and try to understand what is not good, right? And without doing this work, it is kind of you don't get to you don't break through the like the moment where you actually start to get something that you like, right? And a lot of people, I think, just try to draw, it doesn't work exactly, and they stop because it is not what they expected, right? And they don't try to go through this process of analyzing, okay, why does it suck, basically. Yeah. And it is helpful, and it all comes from trying to being honest about your own work with yourself. You don't even need to tell anyone else. You can do it in your room, just practicing your craft. Yeah,
it's something that I've spent a lot of time in my life doing, being critical, and maybe in the last 2 or 3 years, I've started to try to become more open-minded about whether or not that's always a positive trait, or whether there are times when, like, what does it look like if you try to apply that intention in ways that are no longer effective. Like, for example, sorry about that. For example, if you kind of like want to be good at drawing, or if you take 2 people, one of them really wants to be good at drawing, and the other one simply enjoys drawing. If you take the two of them and both of their kind of motivations lead them to drawing, 3 hours a day for 5 years, will there be a material difference between the two in terms of their results? Like, how helpful is it to want to be better versus just spending time and enjoying it? I think there is a point, my sense is that there is a point where if you allow yourself to be consumed by the need to be better, when you do reach plateaus, when there are times when you just don't see the results, it can actually be more discouraging. It can hurt. It can make you want to do it less because you're trying, you're being more, you're trying to go deeper, you're trying to go broader, you're reading more books. Why can't I improve in my drawing? And when you reach that little like local maxima, someone who's just enjoying themselves, who just likes to draw, they might push through that period because they don't feel that sense of friction. So that's something that I think, and even to get a bit more deep, trying not to apply that critical sensibility outside of my work, like in my relationships or in myself. Like, it can be unhealthy to be too obsessive about just obsessive about judgments and like trying to improve things. Some things are kind of best left as they are.
I've been thinking about this also because I was thinking about all of this in a little bit different, from a different point of view. I was thinking a lot about why there is often, why does it happen that's, for example, if we take people who are really good, like above the average at whatever they are doing, I notice that more often than not, those people are good in a very narrow domain, right? And I like, just my thoughts. I was thinking about that. I guess maybe it happens because people, for example, a person who wants to be obsessive about good at drawing, they focus, like, it's not like they should not be obsessive, but they should not be obsessive only about trying just to draw and draw more. Sometimes if you just like stop and try to understand like that, like what I'm doing, I'm not sure that those people actually, sometimes take the time to just stop from whatever they are doing and see and kind of analyze, okay, what I have been doing for the last, like, let's say 3 months, is it actually moving me towards my actual dream that I want to do? Because I have had that experience in my way, is that sometimes you're very deep in some problem and you feel like you just need to push a little bit more, and at some point I just took a step back, and then you realize kind of you're trying, like, instead of trying to build good tools for you, you're just, okay, I'm just like shuffling with my, I don't know, spoon. Don't bother me. I'm just very busy shuffling.
Yes.
And
it's very, I understand exactly what you're talking about. Like if you could be trying really hard in the wrong direction for a very long time.
Yes.
And be getting nowhere. And so, I like to think about these things in like a pyramid, like almost like when we talk about like design, like top down versus bottom up. So like sometimes you're too far down in specifics, and the answer is to be more abstract and to take a step back, like you said, like rather than being critical about the thing that you're working on right now, which is very easy to do. It's very tempting to say, well, I'm here, so the problem must be here. But the sense to say, well, maybe there are other questions that I'm depending this assumption on that need to be asked first. And if I, let's say I'm drawing a nose, and I'm drawing a nose, and I'm trying, what's wrong with my nose? But maybe it's the face that's wrong, and the size of the nose relative to the rest of the face is wrong. But I'm zoomed in on this little pixels. It happens all the time when I'm drawing. So maybe the answer is, well, you need to learn more about anatomy, not sit here figuring out the shading on this small portion of the nose that's not right.
But if we were comparing just like a regular person that draws from time to time just because of interest, and the person who has like a deep drive to try to become better, if this person who has the drive actually takes the time to kind of analyze if maybe the whole path that they are trying to achieve there is not good, if they are able to do that, then I personally feel like the drive is a very good thing to have. Because if you apply this drive to like in a productive way, it can get you pretty far, I think.
I think it's very dependent on how good of a navigator you are. I think the drive, it's like technology, how people talk about, technology isn't good or bad, it's how we use technology or, So it's the same thing. Like drive can be really good or really bad if you know how to navigate. So that's how I see it. That's I think good. If you increase the complexity of a project, it becomes harder to navigate. So, and also navigation is a skill that can be learned. So to bring this back to like a game design conversation, and I think also to kind of explain why I think it's actually that the people who just go with their enjoyment, why I think they have a slight advantage or can have an advantage is I think that people who work on a lot of different projects, small projects, simple projects that are achievable in a small amount of time, get the experience of navigation better because they go through quantity. They say, well, this project didn't work and this project did, and I can compare them and I can see why, we had too many people working on this one, or we got too focused on, small details on this project. But the cost is very low because we only spent 2-3 months on each of them. But if you spend a long time working on a really complicated thing, you don't have as much data experience to use to validate or judge, am I asking the right questions, or is this the right place to be? Like for me, when I'm working on my game, like a 6-year project, how do I know whether the problem is here or here or here, or, it can be very difficult because navigation takes so long with something of a large scale.
I think both of those things have their own value, because another problem is that sometimes if people just go through from one project to another project to another project, they don't get the they don't know, I feel that there are some lessons that you can only learn when only after you kind of bang your head against the wall for like a year, right? And then you realize something. And if for those people, yes, I do believe that you can gain experience. You will gain some additional experience from going through different projects. It is very helpful, but I think it's kind of important to balance those, right? And please. Yeah,
you're right, and I can relate to that, because I think one thing that is a risk, which is I think what you're trying to get at, is if you only work on small projects, you learn how to solve problems in a way that prioritizes or biases towards a certain kind of solution, which is like a simple solution. Let's not get too caught up. Let's not. And if there happens to be a better solution that takes longer to find, you won't find it because you're too biased towards just moving forward. Whereas, yes, if you do take the time, if you spend a year on a problem, there are things you learn in the 8th month that you would never learn if you only spent 2 months on the project.
Yeah.
That's true.
And I think it also very important to think about like personal goals, like why did you do it in the first place? Because maybe your current goal is just to, you want to test ideas and see what sticks, basically. And then you kind of develop projects like 3 months projects and go like this. Or maybe you kind of want to understand what it takes to get those like 2% of like perfection, how
Yes.
to make how to develop the best products that we have in the world that have been developed, right? And when you want to get those 2%, this is, I think, where it requires you to focus on a single goal for a long time.
Yeah, particularly in things that are a matter of, I think, like things that are experienced in a like for consumers. I think that's something that this applies a lot in, because the execution that, how do I put this? That extra, 2%, as you say, applied over like the entire, every aspect of a project. Consumers can understand that something is better. They know that there's that something is in the top 1%. And from an abstract foundational perspective, you could say, well, these two apps, like you could talk about phones, like the original iPhone versus the most, the previous Samsung or any other phones. On paper, they're like the same thing, right? It's a rectangle. It's got a screen on the front. Some of them, had already gotten rid of the physical keys. They were just touch screens, so they all have touch screens. But like the iPhone was it felt very different, even if on paper you could describe them very similarly. And the places where you could see the effort put in didn't seem like the rest of the market prioritized those things. So like the refresh rate on the screen, or just the amount of processing power that was gone into animation, those aren't things that you get just by developing Samsung phone after Samsung phone without someone like Steve Jobs saying, no, it needs to be fun to scroll, for example, or, stuff like that.
This is actually, to be honest, Apple as a company, especially I cannot say that they are, I have a lot of things that I don't understand why Apple is doing a certain way. And I'm like, how? You're Apple. Why are you doing this? But in general, they, especially during the Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive times, this company and their products have made a lot of impact on my interests, right? In terms of visual design and fit and finish and stuff like this. And it is very interesting because Steve Jobs even was talking about why he was doing products for the consumers, right? Because the consumers kind of vote with their dollars, right, for what they will be buying. And when you're developing business to business, kind of the person who makes a decision in terms of whether to buy a product or not is not the person who is using this product usually, right?
Yes.
And one second, I forgot what. In terms of, I was just when you were describing the comparison. When I had it was a very long time ago. I had my first iPhone. It was 3GS iPhone, and
same. That was the same one that I had.
I bought. It was a used iPhone. I couldn't really buy a new one at that point because, but I had you take a Samsung phone, and quite often actually on the paper iPhones were much worse in terms numbers CPU, like memory, camera, and stuff like this. But then
the camera was terrible.
And I had like a Samsung phone and an iPhone, and I was like looking at the Samsung phone, and I was like, why are the ports at the bottom of the phone are not aligned? Like, why? Why you?
Yeah.
And you take an iPhone, and it's like it's just amazing. And,
Yes.
and it is everywhere. Yeah, please, sorry.
No, I mean, it's clear, like the feel in the hand, like the weight of the 3GS, even today, the way it curves, the back of it, it's just like a lot of little, they're not intangible, but they're not obvious if you don't think about them, but you can feel them as a user. Like you pick it up and you swipe through it. It's still, a brand new iPhone 3GS today, if you just put it in someone's hand, they could still recognize the parts that feel good. And I think video games are very similar. Actually, the more I learn about game design and development, the more I notice that a lot of what players consider valuable, even, how do I put this? I might have to go on a bit of a tangent here, but
sure.
A lot of the time I think about that kind of sense of like design elegance, like having lots of different parts that come together in a way that feels like it fits. And I've, in the past, put a lot of emphasis on that that coalescence coming at a very like high mechanical level, all the way down through to the bottom. I've always had this, I guess as a designer, I made an assumption that you would need to integrate all the way down for it to feel good at the bottom. But actually, I think that's still true. I think that something that does that, like hits on all levels, will feel better. But I think that the standard that consumers have, a lot of the time, actually is mostly limited to just the sensory sense of feedback. So, an example would be like in film, the difference between like a Michael Bay film, which has got a lot of like visual flair, a lot of explosions, a lot of motion and special effects, compared to something like, I don't know, Christopher Nolan film or something like that, where Christopher Nolan spends a lot of time agonizing over the mechanical aspects of the film, like the script and how the concepts being explored kind of relate to. I almost think in a way he kind of would make a good game designer, Christopher Nolan, because he seems to always deal in mechanics, like concepts, and whether those concepts are logically consistent, and how they fit together to make something that works. But an example of where that isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all is a film like Tenet, right? Have you seen Tenet?
No.
So Tenet it's an incredibly complex film. It deals with time travel and the concept of time traveling through time in reverse. Like there's like this idea that there's like a process you can do to a physical object to make it flow backwards in time. So you can have a gun where it doesn't shoot bullets that are in the environment that were always there. When you pull the trigger, the bullet comes back to the gun. So it's like it's not a magnet, it's reversing back in time. It's really confusing. But the film does a good job of actually communicating this process. Even visually, it does a good job. But the audio mixing in the film is so bad that it's almost impossible to hear what people are saying. So because those tangible aspects at the very, very bottom, at the sensory level, because it's not a satisfying film to watch, to listen to, it doesn't matter that the most abstract aspects were very well thought out. Like it actually, you could, by contrast, you could have a very simple film that's very clumsy in its script, but feels good to watch. You know, we call those like popcorn films, right? Like, I don't know, some dumb romantic comedy or something silly that has lots of plot holes, you know, but the chemistry between the actors is fun and the dialogue's funny.
But even like you can imagine like a film, like a black and white film where a person, like 90% of the time, just sitting in a chair and speaking, and it could be a very good film, and it's very simple.
Yeah, I guess to like round out where all that was trying to go, I guess for me, when I think about like quality, I think if we come back to the iPhone, it's clear that the iPhone is a product that has intent placed through all the way from the top to the bottom. The proposition is very simple. Like the job that an iPhone 3GS has to do is pretty straightforward. But if you take something that's more complicated, like something that has like a story, as well as like like a video game has like, it might have the story, it might have the gameplay feel, it might have parts of the game that certain players will only how do I say this? You know, some players play for story, some players like to explore the worlds, some players like to, engage in action or whatever. And a lot of the time, the cohesion of all of those elements will not be evident to every player. And something like a game can be considered very flawed and still resonate on a very deep level with enough of an audience for it to be considered like, a greatest of all time game. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think greatness, like quality, with a lot of these larger projects, things like even a phone, but things that have more depth and complexity to them, more moving parts, users and players and consumers can kind of, there's almost like thresholds of where some aspects, if they're really, really high polish, will make the thing shine. And then other parts, on the negative side, if they're really obvious, it can destroy the perception of the thing. But if there's enough good stuff, and the bad stuff is not offensive, then it doesn't matter how cohesive the whole is. It's almost like it's more it's enough for something to stand out in one area for us to appreciate it. Yeah.
Basically, what you're saying, I think I'll try to kind of.
Yeah, please.
It doesn't like. It doesn't. You don't like. For the product to make a great, to give basically joy to the users, it doesn't have to be great and in all aspects of it, right? Like you don't need the product to have the higher quality resolution. You don't like everything, right? There are basic things that if you don't get them good, then even if you have some like a good story, the people will kind of just abandon the thing even before they get your story, just because your basics don't work, right? But if your basics work and you have a great story, it doesn't matter that you don't have like fancy things everywhere, right? So
I think with a bit more reflection, there's something more specific I can say that I think I'm trying to say, which is when you engage with something, in the first moments, you're trying to understand what you're supposed to feel about the thing. And some of that is branding and some of it is just first impressions. And I think consumers, they try, if they can identify with something that they can then reason they're supposed to engage with, and there's nothing blocking that experience, then they can kind of place that thing in a part of their they can base their entire impression on the thing that they think they're supposed to do with it. So for example, the iPhone 3GS had like a 1 megabyte camera or something, or 1 megapixel camera. If it was marketed as it might have been the front facing camera was 1 meg. It doesn't matter. If it was marketed as like a camera, we would say this is a terrible camera, right? Like, but it's not marketed as a camera, even though it has a camera. The fact that the camera doesn't get in the way of how good of a web browser it was at the time, or how good of a media player it was. The fact that we could isolate a use case and say, oh, when I pick this up, it wants to be used this way, and so I will judge it on the things that it seems to care about, and I'll care about those things. It's kind of like that. Like a really good example I can give in the game world is the most recent Zelda game, Breath of the Wild. It's an open world game. I think that its sense of drama, its story, is actually really terrible. It doesn't do a good job. But nobody seems to mind, even myself. I don't really mind that the story's not very good, because as an open world game with lots of... the sense of traversal, like the way that the game unfolds to the player, the way it onboards the player into how to play it, and the way that it lets the player run free, the emergent stories that come up from just environment design and things like that. That's clearly where all the effort is in the design of it. And so we don't judge it on the aspects that seem to have less attention, as long as those aspects don't get in the way of the bits that we feel we're supposed to like about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's like, when some company produces a project and like introduces some like, I don't know, gimmick, and you kind of think like, guys, can you just get the basics right first, and then we can talk about fancy things, right? And yeah, it's actually, and it is a very good point for people, and even for myself, to kind of actually think about and realize that it doesn't have to be perfect everywhere, right? It just needs to get, and I don't know if you have noticed, right? But like, it's just like, a thing that I have been thinking about. If I go to just a computer store online, right? And I see, for example, I select like some computer brand, and they have more computers in general than if I, for example, select Apple, right? Mm-hmm. It is just like a small like nuance, right? That like doesn't make you like better if you just have more products, if they kind of don't get the basics right. And it is interesting. It's kind of related to what we were talking about.
Well, it's even, you could even make an argument that's kind of like, if you just take, so when we talk about computers, there's like an expectation of the base use case. Like I use a computer to do work, to consume some media, etc. But you could just break it out into just features, right? Without products, and say, if I take these features and put them in one product, is that more valuable than if I take fewer features and make that one product, or more features? Like, I think that's what, like, Apple actually did a really good job of defining a product category, in the iPad. The iPad's the perfect example of a product that it didn't exist. So there is no such thing as the basics of what an iPad should be. Mm-hmm. There's only the proposition of, here is a set of features in some hardware. Is this valuable enough to be worth your time? And can we communicate or sell you on a set of use cases that eventually, when you use the thing, you will adopt. Like, I remember, because this was in 2010 or whenever it was, everyone said, like, why do I need this? I have a laptop, I have a phone, why do I need this big phone, basically? It doesn't make phone calls, so like, what's it for? But over time, it's become clear that yes, a large touchscreen, without a keyboard, just with touch input, but with a decent processor, for internet consumption, media consumption, that's a thing that people that resonate with. There's something about those features together that works. And if you put a stylus, even if it's the best stylus, maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe people don't care whether it has a stylus or not. A good stylus, a bad stylus on the iPad, it depends. Maybe some use cases, if you're an artist, maybe you can use, is it Procreate? Maybe you can get more value because that matters to you. But for the core demographic, or like the average consumer, maybe it's irrelevant. Another example would be like a touch screen on a fridge. If the fridge is a really good fridge, the touch screen is irrelevant unless it gets in the way of using the fridge. Right? And the problem is that, perfect example, I have a table which is a height adjustable stand, right? And first version of this table had buttons, physical buttons, to adjust instead. Mm-hmm. The company comes out and makes them like a digital touch screen because technologies, and yes.
They don't understand that when I press this button, it doesn't light the first time. It doesn't recognize my gesture the first time. You're like, why do you do this? You make your product worse. For why?
Yes.
Very angry.
But and there's aspects to that, right? Like understanding the use case again. Like if it's a table and the button is under the table, having a physical button that's tactile, I can control it without looking at it. Yeah. If there's a touch screen, I have to look at it. So like understanding that relationship between the proposition, like what is it that I expect a user or a consumer or a player, what do I expect them to do? What's the behavior that I want from them, and that informs the use cases. And is that like that should inform all of the design decisions. Like there should be no other reason to design something. If it's for somebody, you need to consider them all the way throughout from the beginning, right? This is
like coming like once again thinking about not about technologies. Technologies help us solve problems. What problems in the world we are trying to solve? And I hope I could remember like exactly the story, but there was a story during the but a couple of decades ago with Apple when Jobs was there. There was a story when they were designing the first Apple store, right, physical one, and they rented some kind of garage or something like this, and built a store there, and they kind of located different products like Macintosh here, some other like iPod or whatever they were selling here, and they had this physical store. And then the story was like that someone, I don't remember the name, came to Steve and proposed, I think we need to organize our store not about our products, but about like creating music, creating videos, stuff like this. And they scrapped the whole thing and started from the beginning, because he understood that it's actually this is how it's supposed to be, right?
Yes. Yeah, and of course.
And I was thinking like I was trying to because we started talking with you a little bit about like that it is kind of difficult when you as a person think about all of those things and you understand them, but you also kind of trying to be honest with yourself and understand that you cannot do everything by yourself, right? Yes. And you need help from other people, and you want to you kind of want to bring help from other people because they can help, and the like you can bring more value to the end users, right? But you also want to kind of don't sacrifice the quality for this. And I was thinking about, like, there are not many companies that can do that, but the thing that I came to is that I think it is still possible that in case the people who are making the decision, who have the power in the company to make the decisions, understand the value of those things, right? Because when the company grows and when the people kind of change, the culture is changing a little bit, and sometimes it happens that the people who come in to the position of decision making don't understand, at least not to the same extent, the value and those nuances of why it is important and how they got to the point where they are, even if it is a great company.
And I think that speaks to, and this is something else that I'm very interested in, because what we're describing here is like a bit like a company is a system on its own, and it also has a structure which was also designed. And so is the structure of the company designed in such a way that the people who are best poised to make design decisions are the ones that are naturally being placed higher up in the structure? Like, if the company is not structured, if the design of the company and how promotions work and what factors go into promotions, if that's not designed to prioritize decision making or user-centered decision making or whatever, then it won't, right? Then it will prioritize some other factor, like I don't really know. But you see it.
And I think as a person who, for example, as a leader of a group of people or a company of whatever, I think in terms of, if you just think about how I as a person can make the most significant impact, I think a huge part of it would be just thinking about how to make sure that the incentives within the group are correct, and that the people, not trying to kind of do it yourself because you know how to do that, but think a little bit more how to make sure that this ecosystem works in a way where the people who want to contribute and who have good ideas actually have the voice, right, in a sense.
Yes, I think you nailed it with the word incentive. I think because people are very predictable. Like, it's not, we like to think that we are in control of every decision we make, and that when a company goes wrong, that somebody is to blame. Like, there's a person who made the culture bad or whatever. But really, everybody is just making the choices that make the most sense for them in the moment. So if, for example, a company is losing a lot of talent, if a lot of the original members of the company who, share the vision, or even promising juniors are leaving the company, they're doing it because it makes the most sense for them personally. And that doesn't, it's almost like physics, like it's almost like you can, it's just a set of forces, right? And so you can ask the higher questions of, like, what are the incentives that the system is and the pressures that we're kind of that we are creating through this structure or through these decisions or whatever it is, and how does that impact the flow of resources? It's really it's I think something that is very solvable, that I think just, it's only been the last maybe, I don't know, this might be arrogant of me, but I feel like thinking about things in this way, this incredibly like unemotional, data-driven way of like, hey, we could just engineer this to be better. I don't know how popular that was 60, 70 years ago. We think about like economic systems and like, not that I want to get into it, but like, whether say, capitalism encourages certain markets to evolve a certain way, and the differences between, early stage or late stage capitalism, like who was thinking about whether or not, like who was thinking about late stage capitalism 300 years ago? It's not really, it doesn't become relevant until we're experiencing it. And so I think even at a company level, who was in a position to recognize the trends of how companies go prior to the internet era? Only now that we see millions of companies be created and destroyed based on all these factors over and over again, can we step back and look at the whole collective kind of set of forces and say, oh, this tends to happen a lot. Like, why does this happen? Why what are the forces that make this happen? I feel like maybe this is a solvable problem. It just requires a lot of data, which we have more of over time.
Just like, I just feel, I don't know. I just like for me personally, I'm just trying to think about, start with yourself, right? For me,
of course,
I'm just trying to like, okay, there is a lot of things that I don't understand, that don't make sense, and like, I don't wanna spend my time trying to, think that everything is unfair around me, and I like more focusing on
sure,
like, okay, how I can do something, right? And this is why I love the people who are trying to create something, because these are the people who are actually trying to, take control of the flow of their life, right? What they are working on, would be the result, instead of just like, okay, everyone is doing this, we are doing this. It's very interesting for me, because I was discussing, like in my previous episode, that, for example, when I was personally going through school, I didn't know why we are doing this. I was just like, everyone is doing this. I am going through school. Why? And the idea is that if I actually took a step back, like, and think a little bit about, like, okay, why are we doing this? Why? Like, because it's not like, there are good reasons for why it's worth studying and learning and stuff like this. I have never been like sat down and taught, like, kid, if you study, you can do these things and you can actually improve the world, because there are a lot of things that could be improved. Nobody told me. We were just going through school and stuff like this. And like, I feel like it would be better if I like thought about it earlier.
Oh, I come back to this thought of like sometimes trying to like fixating on control and like control, especially when you could feel it right in the conversation. It becomes like difficult to enjoy the conversation when we talk about forces and factors that are so big that a single person can't control them, right? And I feel like almost there is a way of, I see some people, right, like maybe like people that are like more like new age spiritual people who feel like much less, like I'm trying to think of a better word than hippies, but like people who just want to live and experience life. Those people are, I guess, much less motivated to control things that go beyond them, right? They're just thinking about themselves in the moment. And I think that I think that operating in the present moment, what's around you, that's like mindfulness, right? There's something very healthy about that I think like as a species, we're kind of like evolved to find healthy, right? Like being here, to engaging with people direct, like our own family or what's around us, and our ability to solve complex problems. It's very powerful, but it's also like it creates a lot of stress because it's like it requires like a separation, right, from like yourself, like and not only that, but it's more speculative. You have to go more and more abstract and more less and less concrete to make those really, really long projections. Like if I spend 7 years on this project, like, you know, I will end up with something that will be important to this many people. Like that's a very, there's a lot of intention in that, but there's a lot of also risk as well. And I think operating in spaces where you have less and less control, the more time you spend in those spaces, I feel like it can create an anxiety. So as a student, like you were saying, if someone had sat you down and said, it's really, really important for you to learn this and this and this because you will have the, you know, potential to change the world or whatever, you don't feel like that might have created an anxiety, like a pressure on you to like a responsibility, and one that you don't actually have any control over as a kid?
It is kind of, you know, when you basically we are talking about that it is difficult to make decisions, right? Because when a decision is made for you and something doesn't go well, you kind of at least internally have like a justification for yourself that it is not exactly your fault, right? But when you were giving like freedom basically and you made a decision and it didn't work well, there is no one to blame. There is only you. And yes, those things I think can cause the anxiety. For example, you decide you want to and it is very difficult. I mean, you know, you decided you want to try to become an artist, right? And draw, for example, right? And you invest a lot of time into drawing, right? And people around you, for example, who are at the same age as you are, who are working in jobs, they are moving through their life, progressing through their life, and you can kind of feel that you're kind of wasting your time. Like maybe you didn't make the right decision, and it is very hard, I think, for people. And I don't know exactly what kind of, where the people who are able to overcome it, where they get this kind of the motivation to overcome it and kind of stick. Maybe they are at some level kind of I'm just thinking about myself because
Sure.
I'm thinking sometimes that at some points like this, where it was hard, I was trying, okay, maybe I will kind of waste my life. Maybe I was just like too extreme and kind of, okay, if I waste my life, then like let's fucking do this to the best extent. And I haven't thought like I don't have like a good description about this, but I feel like there is something crazy about those people who are able to overcome this kind of anxiety.
I think so too. Like I look at myself, you know, on a personal level. I'm one of 5 children, so I have 4 siblings, and 3 of them are girls and 2 of us are boys. Me and my brother are very similar, and we're very creative, and we put a lot of time into projects. And we try very hard, like in school and stuff. There's a lot of like effort that we put into like getting to a certain level, or being able to create something, or trying to be like the people that we idolize creatively. And our sisters are very different. They are ambitious, but they don't. It's not driven by a personal like insecurity, and maybe they just have like different kinds of goals, and their goals tend to be a little bit more achievable for them. Mm-hmm. And if I compare us and I think about like why, like what our experiences are like, my brother and I are very anxious people. Like I'm a very anxious person, and I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that I'm doing something like worth doing. Like there's a judgment there that you have to have of like, I don't, like you said it yourself, like you don't want to waste your life. Where does that judgment come from? You know, like animals don't have that kind of judgment. It's something that we give ourselves. And I think in some way, most people who are very driven probably have some kind of like personality characteristic that is pushing them to be better. Because when, like, it's very arbitrary, right? Like who says whether something is good enough or not good enough? You kind of have to identify with the idea of getting better, of improvement, to do this, to just go on this like endless journey of like constantly trying to make things better. I think, you know, even talking about Steve Jobs, there's no question that he was somebody who seemed to have a very like strong emotional connection to the things that he was doing, and that had in a lot of ways like a negative impact on people around him, or you know, a lot of the things that people say that he, like the big moments of his life that, you know, changed the course of a product, it was, you know, this isn't good enough, right? Like it needs to be better, it needs to be this. So what separates, you know, an engineer's decision on what's good enough versus, you know, Steve's opinion? I feel like that kind of, you could justify it in a business sense, and we have, like, I think it's clear to say like, oh yeah, like of course, because the product will be better and people will appreciate it, it's worth more that way. But I think to be a person who wants to be in that position, the director of a company like that, there has to be something that's a little bit, I don't know, unhealthy, a little bit. But I'm okay with that. Like I don't mind it.
It is good when it is good when this unhealthy part leads to something good in the world, because it also can lead to some bad things, and it is not like. First of all, you know, there are stories like how Steve Jobs was like kind of telling everything that it is not good enough, that you are talking about, right? Mm-hmm. And often I see those stories are told kind of in a negative way. And I have always thought, I mean, I kind of understand why he was doing this.
Of course.
Because this emotional attachment that you were talking about, right? And I don't know if it is like, if there is like a better way to do that. And if there was, I wish I could know about this. And if someone can tell me about this, like, please, by all means, tell me, right? And I hear the same stories. For example, I hear the same stories for the Elon Musk, right? Also, yes. That he is going, yes. and it is also like, I personally believe, like, it feels for me that when Steve Jobs was around, he was like, you know, the kind of the center of attention in terms of like creative entrepreneurs. But once he gone, yeah, when he died, now in current world, Elon Musk kind of this center of creative entrepreneurs, right?
Yes.
And I'm not saying that again, there's like a lot of things that I don't understand why he's doing a certain way, but but I cannot, for example, take away that it feels, at least like for me, it feels like this is the person who has a similar, emotional connection to whatever his goals that he's trying to achieve.
It's definitely, at the very least, inspiring, right? Like, I personally, whatever, say what you like about Elon Musk, but the idea of Elon Musk, like, say 4 or 5 years ago, before he owned Twitter, when it was just kind of like, here's a guy who is the CEO of this electric car company and is, pioneering in these reusable rockets with a, aerospace company, and, maybe even starting a third company about, neural implants. Like, this is very inspirational, and it's seeing someone have so much vision and so much investment in making the world a different place and hopefully a better place. There's something about that resonates with me, of course, because and that doesn't have to have, like, the vision of a better world, I think, is something that everybody can relate to, and everybody, will find inspiring. But the reality of who that man must be as a person to want to believe that they can do a good job of, being a CEO of 4 companies and make big design decisions on each of these aspects. I guess, until I find an example of somebody who is more emotionally stable, like, it seems like it's a bit of a pattern, that there's got to be some kind of, I don't know about narcissism, but like ego that's driving them, that makes them think that they have to be the one to determine what the direction needs to be, and that their interpretation is better. Because I think, to be honest, like, some of these decisions, even myself, like, I'm working on my game. There are lots of decisions that I look at and I think to myself, there's no human on this planet who could confidently say what the right decision was for this specific choice that I have in a specific situation, because it's too complex. Like, there's just no way that anyone could be confident. But somebody who is confident in a room of people who says it needs to be this way, they will probably win. Because it's nice to have confidence, to be around somebody who's got confidence, even if it's unwarranted. So
yes, and I mean, for example, a team of people, right? And a person comes and says that, there is a person who most likely you don't know, but Andrej Karpathy. It is a person who was the senior director of machine learning at Tesla, and now he's at OpenAI, and has done a lot of amazing things in terms of like machine learning. And he used like a phrase which I like really like, that sometimes he's working on the project and he was saying like, this thing must exist. Just the project it is amazing when the people like, I don't care, I reject I don't accept the me thinking that it cannot be done or anything. This thing is important enough that it just must exist, and we just we'll get it done. So we'll figure out a way. And
that there is like, definitely, I feel like there's a relationship here between the kinds of people who explore, like people who go on, like before the world was mapped, people who get on boats and sail for months, expecting to find new continents or whatever. Like, it's not a very rational thing to expect something to exist that you don't know exists or not, right? To just have an intuition and say, no, it has to be this way. But it's valuable that we have people like that, because sometimes there is something there. Even if 80, 90, 99% fail, if there is 1% who finds something valuable, everybody can enjoy that new discovery. So in a way, it's a process which I think maybe the word unhealthy was not a good choice for me, but maybe necessary. It's like a necessary kind of discomfort with the norm. Do you know what I mean? Or with what's known and what's proven and what's stable. You know, I don't know how to. I think it's it's valuable in a society sense, but on a personal level, because I know I'm one of those people in a way. I am tempted by the things that I don't, by the promise of something that I don't know exists yet. But I can see how that affects me in my other parts of my life too. So
yes, it's true. It's certainly, there is a reason why Elon Musk has been married multiple times.
Yes. Right.
So, and stuff like this. So
yeah,
I have been, I just like, for me personally, because I have been thinking a lot about this. First of all, yes, we can talk nice about like people who are crazy and 90% of them fail, right? And one thing is that it sucks to be the person who fails, for sure. And I was thinking about, okay, you don't get the success is not guaranteed, right? But
yes,
what is important for you to at least like try to at least mitigate somehow those chances of failure as much as you can. And my answer to this so far, the thing that I have been like the best ideas that I was able to come up is you either need to be you should, yes, like be open-minded and be like a little bit crazy about ideas is good, but you should not just like lock on this one. You need to understand that just having like crazy ideas without implementing and getting them to the end is not useful, and it is much more likely to fail, right? So for me, I would say that I've been thinking that you need to try to find those balances, right, between being crazy and trying to get stuff done. And personally, I like finding those balances is very difficult for me, because it's much easier for me to go to extremes either on one way or the other way. And I have tried this, like for example in software, trying to like implement some crazy thing, and only like with some experience I was able to kind of understand it a little bit more intuitively, that trying to go to extremes, it is easier, but it doesn't work usually. And another interesting thing is that there are two extremes on the left and right, but there is also extreme trying to get exactly in the middle. And I was thinking about this because, like, okay, now if Igor, you shouldn't go like extremely to the left or to the right, try to get precisely in the center. And it was also very, very dangerous thing for me, because I could try to focus on this. And for me, I kind of decided that I want to be closer to the center, but most likely I will kind of skew a little bit in one side or the other, but closer to the center.
Yeah, there's kind of like, I guess what you're describing is like, in navigation terms, it's like there is bias to explore certain kinds of spaces. And then there is acknowledging that that sometimes you need to course correct, right? But how much of that, how strong is the course correction force? Because sometimes if you just constantly are course correcting, you don't actually go anywhere. You sort of just, it's like indecision, because it's like, well, maybe I'm being too impulsive, or maybe I'm working too hard. And if you don't commit to any strategy, then you just do nothing. So having a strategy and just committing to it oftentimes is better than being too confused by the different strategies you could take and not picking one.
And this is why I think the best idea that I was able to kind of crystallize in my head so far is this idea of trying to being honest with yourself. Because when you face a roadblock, you don't know whether like you should actually try a different approach, or you kind of just being lazy and not wanting to pursue it, right?
Yes.
And it is very difficult to kind of honestly say to yourself that you are being lazy.
Yes.
And
Or stubborn.
yes, or stubborn. For example, because of because you have invested already a lot of time into this one, and you are just cannot allow yourself to. You do not want to accept the fact that you have wasted a lot of time for pretty much for nothing. Maybe learning, but pretty much for nothing, right?
Yeah.
And it is. I think it is the most difficult part and the most impactful part if you can kind of manage to be able to kind of honestly communicate with yourself inside of yourself.
Yes, 100%. And I think that honesty is the right word there, because it describes the relationship between your perception and your reality. And that's the same process as it's like the scientific method or learning. Like if you reject information, new information that you learn, like say I have some intuition and I think there's going to be something valuable over here. I think this is worth trying. And you try it, and the data you get back says this is not a good idea. Well, if you ignore that data, if you're dishonest about it and you say, no, it's definitely going to be over there, then of course that's, I think, where it goes wrong. And I think where, like we talk about those personality types becoming counterproductive, is when the ego gets in the way of the reality, when the information is there. And I think that it's difficult because at the start of a project, there is no information. So you have to have somebody who is willing to imagine and be creative and be disruptive. You have to have those people starting the journey. But if you don't have control measures in place where there's a maintained relationship with reality, then how do you stop them from going off course into some place that doesn't make any sense? And I think back to Steve Jobs, I was recently listening to someone give an interview about who had worked with Steve Jobs. I can't remember who they were, but they'd worked on the iPhone. And they actually said, like, yes, Steve wasn't just a tyrant. If you gave him a solution that was better than what he was proposing, he would listen to it. You have to be careful, you have to be conscious and nice about it, but eventually he'd come around to it because he cared enough about the end product that his vision wasn't the only thing he could see. So I respect that, and I try to be aware of that. And I think that's probably where it's kind of the one area where I think having a team over a single person can be helpful, because you have those balancing forces of other voices, other perspectives, where doing it all yourself, especially over a long period of time, it's easy to lose that relationship with reality, and the intuition that you used at the beginning. Like for me, I think that when I started game design, the thing that I valued most was my experience as a player. The idea that, I know what's good because I've played so many games, I know what feels good. But making a game is not the same as playing games. And so the longer you spend making it, if you don't have a constant relationship with games and playing them, you actually lose a sense of intuition. Like you lose the relationship, the empathy with the player, because you fixate on problem solving or productivity or something else. So I think that's where splitting responsibilities and having somebody who's a director, who's not actually working on the tiniest things, helps that person keep clarity, because they're not investing, years of their life into some prospective aspect of the technology. Like, imagine if Steve Jobs was obsessive about antenna technology or something. and had spent, all this time on a specific kind of antenna that just wasn't going to work. Like on the iPhone 4 or whatever, the antenna on the outside,
iPhone 4 was like interesting scenario with the antenna. It was nice when it is also give everyone like a free bumper. Stuff like this.
Yeah, so not to say that was like somebody's stubborn decision to keep that in or whatever, but you can see where I think it happens with Elon to an extent. I think he's a pretty stubborn person sometimes.
Yeah,
I get the sense. I don't know.
Yes. For example, I still don't I don't own a Tesla, and I have actually considered purchasing a Tesla, but I decided mostly not. I haven't purchased it yet. And the reason, there are certain aspects which seem very strange to me, and I don't understand. They kind of, and I do think that they come from the personality of Elon Musk, right? And I don't understand, because they don't make the product better, right?
Yes.
And they are kind of a reflection of the personality of the person, right?
Yeah.
And the simplest, even for example, in the Model S, they have changed the wheel for a yoke.
Yes.
I don't follow this exactly. I think there was some options now maybe to get it as well with but
it's a good example.
I didn't understand this, why?
Yes.
Okay, you're making the display in front of the in front of the driver better. Why? For example, on Model 3, they still have the central display, and that's it. And there is a speed in the top left corner, right? And why don't you have a projection on the screen that I don't need to look aside while I'm driving? And I
Yes.
don't I just these are the basics that we were talking about. We don't.
Yes.
I don't need the car to dance until it can show me the speed. As basics. Let's get basics first. And this is what I don't really understand. Why?
Yeah, I think that this comes from the way I've been thinking about this a lot recently. Actually, I'm going to make a video about it maybe today for my YouTube channel about a principle or a set of how would I call this? Something that I've noticed, a dynamic in the relationship between design intent and consumer experience. And when things go wrong like that, when you ask yourself why is this way, I think it comes from it's a question of values. So there is something that Elon Musk values higher than the driving experience if the driving experience is being sacrificed for something else. And if the values that drove that decision to make a yoke rather than a wheel don't align with the rest of the values that go to the proposition of what the product is, then there's a dissonance, there's a lack of harmony between the values, and so it gets in the way of them, which makes the product worse, because having the values align is it creates a stronger identity. That's how I interpret it. So that's why things that are simple are really, it's easy to understand something that's simple because there are only 2 or 3 decisions that go into making it. So it's easy for those to align. But the more complicated something is, the more chance there is for some values to come in that disrupt the core vision. So in that case, what is it? Is it that yokes, from a marketing and branding perspective, are more like F1 races, so they feel more sporty? Is that worth more than the utility of having a wheel? Is it, like you said, that you want vision over the dash, more, or something like that? I think the same thing comes from touch screens over buttons. physical dials in a car for like the air conditioner or the radio are like very useful. They're very practical. Maybe they're less sexy, you know, maybe they don't feel as cool as a touchscreen, but it's measurably less safe, you know, to have a touchscreen off to the side where all the information is, if the driver has to be looking forward. You know what I mean?
And you know, my thing has always been, because I'm talking about similar ideas about product design sometimes with my friends, and I have always told them, you know, I just like, and I'm not sure if it's just like an idea. I'm not sure if it is like one person decision, but if there was a person who has made this decision, like I wanted to just talk with them and just honestly talk with them and understand why. Why do you think it is like a good idea? I don't know. I have always wanted to talk with people who make those like decisions that I don't really understand, because like maybe I'm missing something. Who knows?
I mean, a lot of it, I think, there's like multiple things, right? Like one is that the cars are part of a business. And so the business is foundational on, like the success of the business is based on sales. Sales are made through marketing, not through experience. Like you don't drive a car for 6 months and then purchase it, right? Because maybe it would be a very different landscape if that was the case. If you had to experience something for a long time, say, this isn't good, this isn't for me. Like with films, it's like that, right? Like the trailer sells the film. There is a sense that reviews also sell a film. If a film's very highly critically acclaimed, people will go and watch it. But the fact that the market is a factor, that can also that I think always has a risk of creating stresses on the product or values that are counter to the actual experience, because the experience is not what's selling the product. It's other things. So like a yoke might be more attractive, but less practical. But you're not making the purchase on practicality because you haven't used it yet. So.
And it is it's very interesting when you need to go like and spend, like if you buy a car, right? You need to spend like a significant amount of money, and you kind of don't really like, you can test drive it, but like you will not even you will not like feel everything until you kind of spend some time and have time basically to explore and in particular in your situations for your life, because otherwise it's just like, and it is, it is very, this is where like the brands, for example, why I thought I have always like for a long time I was thinking about that the brand is basically from one side, from the company point of view, brand is a promise, right?
Yes.
A promise that
exactly,
like we promise you that if you buy our product, you can expect, like basically that your expectations will be met, right? And
beyond that, it's not just that, it's telling the consumer what their expectations should be as well, right? It's both. It's saying, these are the expectations you should have, and they will be met. Because if...
Yes.
Yeah.
Because like, you do not promise what you cannot deliver, basically, right?
Yeah.
And for example, with Apple, for me, even though I like the Apple display, which is the cheapest one, which costs like 2,000 or something like this. But anyways, this thing is bad product. I think there are many things that are bad with this. Like there was a problem with camera, but other things. But for example, sometimes Apple has like good products, even if we take the Apple display, which costs like 6,000, right? The expensive one.
Yes.
Yes, it is expensive. But especially when it came out, when you bought it, yes, you spend a lot of time, but you know that you bought a good product. And in this sense, it is in some sense even easier to spend this money because you know
Yes.
that you will get something for it.
Yes.
And if you just take this money and kind of don't want to spend that much and you want to and go buy some other product, yes, will it show the picture? Yes, but it is all wobbly and stuff, and you kind of, yes, you know that you have spent like $4,000, but can you live actually without like torturing yourself that you kind of didn't actually went and did spend like those money? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really, really important distinction between value and quality. So quality, like something that is high quality, raises the price, or you expect the price to be higher. So like Apple's
Yes.
promise is, yes, our products are very expensive, but they're very high quality. So the value proposition is, as long as we keep that promise, then it's worth it, right? And so you feel confident as a consumer. They're very consistent. Their products, yes, they're very expensive, but I feel good spending all that money because I know that it's worth it. But you can make equally good promises as a company that makes budget hardware, right? You could say,
Yes.
yes, we make very, very cheap products, and they're not great, but we'll make sure that they're valuable for the money that you spend. Like a lot of people buy phones on Alibaba or whatever, like a lot of those budget phones. And of course, they're not as good as Apple phones, but for the user, for the promise is being kept, right? Like it will do the things that it promises, and I paid an amount of money that I feel happy with. So it's more about how good the promise is than and how well it's kept than how good the product is in that instance.
But you know, there is also another thing that, for example, if you want to do small things like buy like a maybe it is I am that crazy, but if you want to buy like Thunderbolt cable, right? Yes, Apple sells a Thunderbolt cable for like Thunderbolt 4 for 3-meter cable for $150. I love Apple, but it is too much expensive, especially when you compare with worst product, which is like $20.
Yes.
But for example, and the thing that people usually don't consider is that when you want to buy a product from a different company, you want to buy like, I don't know, a scale, a Thunderbolt cable. You just need to go to Amazon and you need to spend time trying to understand which company to kind of trust, right? Mm-hmm. But when you have like a brand like Apple or something like this, it's kind of, it's very, very difficult to measure quantitatively, right? But when I know that I need to buy a computer, I don't need even to make a decision. I kind of know what I am buying, unless there is like touch bar and stuff like this.
Oh, I think brand loyalty is extremely important, and I think it's something that in the last maybe like 15, 20 years, I've noticed it's not something about industry becoming much, much more like the turnover of consumption of products seems faster. People always talk about how like, oh, in the old days, you buy a washing machine and the washing machine would last, 15 years, but now it only lasts, 2 years or whatever. Mm-hmm. So there's so much choice right now, and there's so little reason to, what's the word? The promises don't last as long, and so people are less incentivized to place loyalty. Like for me, even Apple for me, like Apple, 20 years ago, I have a different mental relationship with that Apple than Apple today. I probably don't really trust Apple today as much, even in terms of quality. And I think that that's based on the record. Like you can see, bumps in the road of quality. Even I would say like for me, I was really into when Microsoft got back into hardware, and they started doing phones and tablets and stuff. Like when the Surface came out, and when Windows Phone was coming out, I was really invested in them because I thought, oh, here's like a new kind of brand entity. It's a new kind of team working on some stuff. And the Surface, the first 3 iterations, I was really impressed with the progress they were making, and I had a lot of confidence. I almost just on principle would buy a Surface every new generation. But then the Surface, like 3, 4, 5, 6, all had the same shell, like almost exactly the same specs. And that changed the perception, right, for me. It was like, oh, they've stagnated. Maybe whatever's happening in the company is not, they're not investing whatever it takes to continue innovating in this space. So like I just kind of stopped taking an interest. And so I think that having that, there's almost like a promise that's being made, not just within a product, but within the brand, like product to product, like over time, you know what I mean?
And it is interesting with Apple. Everyone knows that every year there will be like a new iPhone, right? It's like consistent thing that they haven't broken, at least so far.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, you don't need to think about it, right? It's kind of the promise, right? But if Apple didn't release a new iPhone, then it would be like a big news event, I think.
Right, but there's also like a perception that happens like over the last 15 years of iPhones. There is also a kind of expectation that the consumer base has created, where there's like I think they call it like TikTok or something like that, or like it's like every second year is the bigger jump. You know what I mean? So you don't buy a new iPhone every year. You buy it either this year and then wait 2, or this year and wait 2, but you not every year.
Yeah.
And that's probably part of things like phone contracts that last 24 months and this and that. But there's like an unwritten rule that also is part of that promise. And I think, consistency is important, but also diversity. It kind of comes back to, I always bring all this stuff back to stories. I think people foundationally expect, they think about things in stories, even if it's subconsciously. So like, what is the story of Apple? I feel like post Steve Jobs era, there is no story. Like, I don't really feel like there's a narrative of the company. I don't really know what they're working towards or what they've got going. It's almost a bit soulless because Steve was kind of like, Steve was the story. And I feel the same way with like the, in a completely different way, but the Marvel films, like there was this, Marvel cinematic universe with the Avengers, and you could see all of the characters and all the pieces moving towards this big conclusion. It happened, and every movie since then has been like, where is the meta layer of story that's happening with this franchise? And should I still care about the franchise and get excited about it? That's the real one. Like, what does it take to get somebody excited about where a company or a brand or a franchise will be 5 years from now? That requires more than just consistency. It's like dynamism. They have to be doing different things in ways as well, not just the same thing.
I don't know I certainly think I do understand the value of the stories, right? And I do believe it is very important because, for example, even when we talk about marketing, right? Like, a lot of people who I talk with about marketing is like social media marketing and how much money our marketing campaign will cost and stuff like this. But how wow, like why? How does it fit in the broader picture? Like why are we talking about all those things, right? And I would say, I think that even with Elon Musk, the I think a large part of like the rise of like Tesla, SpaceX is the story that
Yeah.
okay, we are going to Mars. Like why? Like I don't know, we are going to Mars.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, it's an
And
interesting. I mean, it is. It's a beautiful story. It's very engaging, and seeing it unfold is like, it feels like humanity is doing something important, right? It feels like important.
and you can, I think you can kind of a little bit connect to it, right? Because you kind of become a part of like something like awesome that we are building, right? And
Yeah,
you
like
can
the-
cheer it on.
Like a space race in the 60s, you know? It's the
Yeah.
same thing. Yeah.
Yes, it is interesting. I want to think a little bit more about like, and I have been thinking, but I want to spend a little bit more time trying to, understand how to tell these stories in a way that that kind of resonates with people. Because I noticed that when I talk with people in general, because first of all, when I talk with people, I often like in the first like 10 minutes of the conversation go deep into like why are you doing these things, what these things, no, like I mean, yeah, and very 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 deep, and
Yeah.
I don't like. It's very difficult for me to have like conversations about like something, and the idea is that when I talk with people, what I have noticed is that when I talk about the ideas that I have and the way how I describe about them, people enjoy it. They get excited about this, and like I always like, okay, like don't you want to do something like amazing yourself? And I was trying to kind of get this connection with people, but unfortunately, what I found is that when people talk with me, they kind of get ramped up, but the problem is that when I leave, there is no like, after like 3 days they're back to where they were in terms of like level of excitement, and they don't continue to kind of excite themselves by themselves, and I'm not
Yeah.
sure exactly how I can. I was thinking a lot about how I can, like, maybe I should be communicating in a little bit different way so the people can continue, like, get energy from me, let's say,
Is
and
this
then
like
continue themselves.
Is this like a business thing? Like getting people motivated to maybe join you on a project kind of thing?
When I was talking with people, to be honest, I was talking with them in different contexts. Sometimes it was in a sense, in the context of trying to kind of work on something together, right? But sometimes it was in a sense I was just sharing, for example, with my friends, right? Some of my friends, I just wanted for them to get some progress in their life, to get the things that they want, they talk about, and like I have
Okay.
problems with it.
Well, that's kind of a different conversation, but motivating somebody to do something, I think, always requires for them first to have an emotional investment in that thing. And if that emotional investment is something external, if it's you getting them excited, then of course the excitement will leave when you leave, because it's not a fire in them, right? And so it's a different exercise of communicating something to somebody that resonates with them so much that they will choose to act in different ways towards that thing. That's not a responsibility I would expect most people to like, even myself. Like, I can't tell someone how to think or what to get excited by. You know,
But
I can
this
try to
happens-
argue, but
This happens. This often happens even for the. There is another problem. Is that often when I talk with people, as I said, I very. very quickly get to the meat of the things, right? I'm trying to understand like what their goals are, right? And what they are trying to build or something. And I like, at least for the people that I have like met, right, in my like just in my circumstances and the way how I was living, I don't often like. I don't often see a person who can, like when you ask them about their goals, who can clearly explain the steps. Here's my goals and here's how I will get them. Like when I talk with people about their goals, it is more like something hand waving. And
I call that, there are some people that I met, like when I was in university, like I would call people like that, like dreamers. Like it's a dream, but there's no action, there's no like plan that's concrete. I mean, I guess for me, the skill or whatever it is, the motivation to try to like fix that in other people, I don't know if I feel that much of a drive to do it, because I think like a good example would be in university, like in my degree, there were like maybe 50, 60 people in my year group, and only maybe 10 or 15 of us were like extremely passionate about the subject matter, and even maybe 2 or 3, like I did an extra year of honors, like an honors project, which is like a research project after the coursework. There only 3 of us did that. So only really 3 of us were so interested that we would go into like academia just to be more close to the subject material. And when I think about like, if the question is like why were maybe 50% of the students not so invested that they would go that far? The answer is, well, for them, this is not, either they haven't found their place in life, like they don't know if this is what they want to do. They might just be doing it because it was something that seemed interesting, or maybe they have something else that they're more interested in, that they place more importance in. And so just because something is important to me, I have to accept that people are in different places in their life, in different times in their journey, and could be on different paths to me, heading in a direction that's somewhere else. I mean, there are plenty of things that I started doing that I don't currently do today, like playing guitar. I love playing guitar. I love music, but I just don't have the time to prioritize my guitar playing skills the way that I do with my game design. So if someone was just looking at me in terms of my guitar abilities, they would say, oh, he doesn't practice, so how can I make him care more about guitar, and how can I make him put more effort into that area of his life? But it's like, well, because it's not a priority for me.
I don't think it is. Like I'm not thinking about like trying to get people interested in something that they are not interested in. The problem is that like it is difficult to understand like what those people are interested in. This is the other thing.
But I think even that, even the drive that you're describing, not everyone is driven, and I think that's okay. I think that because we need people to be. I think most people, but like society cannot function if everybody is driven to change the world.
Yes.
Because we'd all be going in different directions. Like we need people who are garbage collectors, and we need people who paint walls, and we need people who are caregivers. Like that's really important, and I value what those people do just as much as I value what I do. And I think I try as I get older to place the dream and the vision of like changing the world or whatever, or even like changing my industry, like the game landscape, like making a game that's so important that people think of it as like genre defining or whatever. That pursuit is, in the grand scheme of things, like it's meaningful to me. and it might be meaningful to the people in my industry, but it's that meaning is very arbitrary, right? Like it doesn't, it might not mean anything to my neighbors or to my parents or whatever. So having big goals, even, not everyone has to have big goals, you know. If they have big goals, but they just don't know how to pursue them properly, then you know, you can talk about self-help and productivity and that kind of stuff. But even that, some people just don't. I think it's very, and maybe this comes back to the personality thing. If you don't have like something in you that's just dissatisfied, like unhappy with the way things are, like on a core level, then it's hard to tell someone, no, you have to try harder to be better. You know, you have to be more organized. You have to be more interested. Like, how can you do that if they don't already have that inside of them? This has been fun. I gotta go. I gotta go soon.
Sure. Yeah, I believe we could talk like a lot.
I could talk, gosh, literally until the sun goes down. But
I think we can wrap up here. I don't know. Do you want to share maybe something?
Oh, I mean, hey, if you're watching this and you are familiar with my content and you haven't reached out to me, I'm looking to build a team right now. So if you are anyone who works in games, whether that's in publishing or in music production or art or programming or anything like that, and you're interested in working with me on my project, then feel free to do that. You can find me at Adam C. Younis, that's AdamCYounis, on Twitter and on YouTube and on Twitch. All of those places I have the same handle. There you go.
Great. I hope there will be people who would kind of that the content and all this discussion that we were having resonates with, and then they can kind of know where to go and to kind of. I really hope that I want more great things in the world. Really, it's just amazing.
Me too.
I just want cool stuff. Okay. Anyways, that was really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.